can I just give a little explanatory introduction to this week's podcast? Our guest this week is none other than David Johnson, and David's a veteran photographer and graduate of Ansel Adams California School of Fine Arts. If you've not worked that out already, it does mean that David absolutely qualifies for the term veteran, both in age and service to his country. And whilst there are times when he's as sharp as a tack, there are other times when his memory is just a little softer. So with this in mind, please sit back and enjoy a virtual visit to David and his wife Jackie's home. Erik, Simon and I were truly privileged to have the opportunity to speak with David and Jackie, and I hope you'll take this opportunity to slow the pace of the modern world and take in David's words of calm and wisdom. And we're immensely grateful to David's wife, Jackie, who joins the conversation at some point during the podcast and just adds some context and greater depth and wisdom to David's words. So thank you very much, David and Jackie.
Hello and welcome to episode 44 of the Large Format Photography Podcast. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by Andrew Bartram, Erik Matthey and David Johnson. Hello Andrew.
Hi Simon.
Hello Erik.
Hey Simon.
And hello David.
Hello.
It's great to have you with us, David.
Great to be here.
Okay, now first of all, now normally I usually say thank you to our last guest, but we haven't had one for a couple of weeks, so I'll be able to do that next week. But now we're going to do things slightly differently because Andrew and I have got hardly anything of any interest to talk about. So we're going to go over to California and Erik because he's been up to things. So let's find out what Erik's been doing.
Well, I haven't. I mean, sadly, I still haven't taken any photographs, but I'm about to start taking photographs with Jenny Sampson, the skateboard portraitist. But I'll talk about that another day. The other thing that actually has been happening is I've managed to make some decent headway on the custom camera lens that I'm building for Alana Airitham's 8x10. Mm-hmm. And that's coming along really nicely. The wood is turning out very, very prettily. And for those of you in the audience, and perhaps David, who don't know about this project, Alana Airitam is an African-American photographer who hails from Brooklyn, currently living in Arizona. Mm-hmm. And on a family trip to North Carolina, they stopped by to visit a pair of her great aunties, as she calls them, and she on her mother's side. And she discovered that when talking to her two great aunts, that they were living on the plantation or the remains of the plantation that her great grandfather was born on as a slave. And across the street, literally, is another plantation, the Allen Plantation, where her great grandfather would cross the road and visit, get up to no good probably, and fell in love with the plantation owner's daughter. And they fled together to Pennsylvania and got married and started a family. And that's her family background. And she was blown away by the fact that nobody really talked to her. She had no idea. But also that on this side of her family, she had ancestors who were both enslaved and slave owners. Mm-hmm. And she was just floored by this. So she's originally a digital photographer. She got into photography late, and she's jumping into the deep end of the pool and going straight to an 8x10, the big guns. Mm-hmm. And she's going to go down there and take portraits of folks and do oral histories and interviews. And the camera itself, her 8x10 camera, is going to be custom built using the wood that's reclaimed from those old slave cabins that her great-grandfather would have lived in, been around. Mm-hmm. So it's this really intense project that has a lot to do with her family history, a really intense part of her family history, but also, really America in a nutshell, right? And how separated and divided we've sort of always been along these racial lines, but also how intermixed we can get both literally and figuratively, right? Without really even knowing it. And these conversations we don't have around it, which really reminded me, as we talked about you and about your history of segregation, right? And you growing up in a highly segregated country and coming out here to San Francisco after World War II to a place that was still segregated, where, when you talk about your images, you like the photograph that you climbed up the scaffolding, we'll get to that. You're like, oh, I wasn't allowed in that bar, and we weren't allowed to go here, and black artists didn't play. They could play the Fairmont, but they couldn't be in the house band, and they couldn't stay there. And many of your signature images are from the civil rights protests. The young boy on Lincoln in front of City Hall and whatnot. It's really quite striking. So I thought, man, given the current time and everything that the United States is going through, we're finally having this reckoning. I'm really excited to have you here to talk about these things. I think you have a historical perspective that a lot of people don't have. So man, I'm over the moon, honestly. But let's start at the beginning, if we could. When you were the first person in your family to learn how to read and write, is that true?
That's true.
Okay. And that somehow led you to being gifted or winning as a prize, like your first camera. Where did that come from? And also, I have to know, what was the camera, and do you still have it?
I don't have it.
Oh, okay.
I don't have it.
But what camera was it, and what magazine did you get that from, and how did that come to pass?
Let me go back and make a correction.
Okay.
I do have a copy of my first camera, which I got from a drugstore. There was a drugstore in my neighborhood, and they had things like that. And I had to almost take it apart. And it used film, okay? And I became interested because I'm in high school, and there was a gentleman who was a teacher in high school. He taught things like, come down to my shop, and I'll teach you how to build this, that, and the other. So I had this interest that I would go to as I'm going into my high school daily. And so the drugstore had the cameras, and they were turned over to the drugstore because people hawked their cameras then. Camera was worth all the money. So I went in and said, I don't have very much money, but I'm interested in photography. Can you sell me a camera? Well, we have one that someone brought back. It's not very good, but it will do the job for you. Thank you very much. And they sold me that camera. I can't remember how much, but it was enough that a kid who didn't have a job could buy. And it was not in the greatest shape. But what did it do? It took pictures, the very first pictures I took, which was on the streets in Jacksonville, where my wife and I went to recently. Jacksonville was a main street in Jacksonville, Florida. And as the main street in San Francisco, which I was accustomed to, Main Street taking people on the street. So that was kind of my interest. But how do I acquire one of these cameras? Well, some people from the hawk shop, we picked up some of their cameras that the people never returned to collect their money. That was my first camera. Roll film. Before the days of the modern cameras.
Right.
You depended on the light that was there. You didn't have flash and that sort of thing. So that was kind of my beginning. Took a few pictures, and it began to attract attention of people that I photographed and people in my home. On the street where I live was a grocery store. And I worked at that grocery store at a time when I was not going to school. I was so popular. They said, David would be good working in your store, Butch. And Butch lived in another part of this segregated city, Jacksonville. So I became very popular in the store. Not these people would be my future subjects, would come into the store when I'm not at school. And they seemed to like what I did when I sent it out to be processed. So that was kind of the beginning. People are attracted to what you did, David. What are you going to do with this art? They didn't call it art. What are you going to do with this? Well, I'm keep taking pictures as long as they like it. It was not money in it. There was no money, but they gave me something which doesn't compare with money. They admired them. And I was connected with the photograph. Well, David, if you get this kind of response, keep taking pictures. Find yourself another camera, which I did. That was kind of the beginning. And it was a gentleman who was a teacher in my high school. The high school, by the way, that my wife and I recently attended. And I had done so well over all these years. Jackie, you remember that? I've been there. And they showed some of my pictures. And they put a big sign, "A dream begun so long ago." And they photographed me because a product from that Stanton High School finished, went away to school, and made a name for himself. And I also was able to show pictures that I had taken during those very early days. So the feedback I'm getting is, what are you doing, David? You're getting a positive response. What are you going to do with it?
Well, and then you went from there. Did you take any photographs while you were in the Navy? Because you went from there into the Navy during World War II.
Yeah.
Right. So were you able to take any photographs in the Navy, or was just the Navy the Navy?
Yeah.
You know?
Only while I went to the Philippines. That was my that was my place that I did.
Okay.
Once I was drafted and went to Maryland to get my training before going to the Philippines. But when I got to the Philippines, I finally got hold of a camera and took a few pictures. And it seemed to me that I'm getting positive feedback when I point the camera to people. They weren't said, "Oh, they're saying I would like one of those pictures." In the Navy, I couldn't provide that. Someday I probably would be able to do that. Once I get back home and I can take advantage of the GI Bill.
Right.
GI Bill was my pocket money. I wrote to Ansel Adams once I returned. I'd never heard of Ansel. But I had seen some work that Ansel had done that ended up with newspapers that the drugstore where I live stocked those papers. So I wrote a letter to Dear Mr. Adams. I'm a Negro. I want to be a photographer. I saw some of your work. How do I do this? And I have a GI Bill. And so wrote me back, it doesn't matter that you're a Negro. And it doesn't matter that you live in Jacksonville, Florida. It does matter if you can qualify with the GI Bill. I wrote him back, thank you, Mr. Adams. I do qualify because I'm a veteran and I have the GI Bill. And I was in California while I was in the Navy. Everything is falling into place. Can I get back to California? Do I have the money? I had gone back to my job that I had prior to going into the service. The war is going on. And high school kids go get a job in the local air base where they had planes to go out and do something. Mm. So I got the GI Bill. I don't have to get anybody's permission. I wrote back to Mr. Adams. It doesn't matter, Joe, I mentioned. I don't have any vacancies now, but stay in touch. I stayed in touch. And I began to search around. What about my job? David, if you come back, if it doesn't work, you can come back to Jacksonville and get your job. My job, by the way, was working on some parts of the airplane. It ran tours over that part of the Atlantic Ocean. So I've got the GI Bill. I don't have to get anybody's permission to leave because I'm not a kid. And got the lady I live with, my mother, wonderful lady, raised me because my mama was busy doing other things. Not too busy to have me, however. So there's no barrier, David. What do you want to do? And so I said, it doesn't matter that you're a Negro. If you're the first time there's a vacancy, I'll let you know. Within 2 weeks, I got a letter from Ansel Adams. There's a vacancy for you if you choose to. Let me know soon. Because people out here had already heard about Ansel Adams. I know about Ansel Adams. There's nobody to stop me. I don't have to go to mom and say, can I go? I went to my boss and he said, well, you can leave, but I'll put your name on a list. If things don't work out, you can come back and get your job. The job was still, we were still active in the war in a limited way. In the base that I was working at, which I had gotten through high school, we did repair on planes that flew raids over that part of the Atlantic. There's no problem leaving my job. Ansel said, you're welcome. By the way, you may stay at my house. There were other photographers who lived at that house, who knew about Ansel Adams, who knew about photography. Right. I didn't know anything about this.
Can I ask, like the images of Ansel's that you saw, right, that impressed you, that get you interested, which images were they? Because during the war, he took any number of images, and not all of them were the landscapes that he's typically known for. So what images did you see that really put him, into your consciousness?
Okay. The fact that when I saw the newspaper, there was the mountains, that area that Ansel Adams lived, hardly to be the place that I was going to make my name. But he's well known, and since I've been on the coast, I've visited Ansel Adams' house, and I visited that entire area. In fact, they have some of my photographs that they had seen. But we got to get David Johnson here because he gives Ansel Adams a lot of credit for his success in photography. So I'm finally making that. I had gotten to see him because he owned a house in San Francisco prior to going there. I go up there much later in life after I had really made a name for myself. So it was good to see. This is where Ansel Adams lived, and these are the mountains that he took.
So it was his landscape photography. Because I had read someplace that you'd also mentioned his work with the Japanese internment camps as well, right? Which he did in the early and mid parts of the war, where he documented China Lake, I think it was, and a few other of the Japanese American internment camps during the war itself. Did you see those at all, or how did those impact you when you did see them? Once
I saw them was when I got in his territory where he had lived. They had pictures all over. Plus, there were pictures showing in the school, the California School of Fine Arts. Mm-hmm. I was taken back. Here's a man whose photography sparked my interest in photography, not the subjects, and that he had taken some photographs in that part of San Francisco, a limited way. And I'm going to be in this area because he had agreed that there was a vacancy in his house, and there was an opening if I chose to say yes. And once my boss learned that I was leaving, he said, don't worry about it. If things don't work, you can still have a job. The luck for me was I ended up living in the house of Ansel Adams in San Francisco.
Right.
Where many of the other people who were going to be at the California School of Fine Arts. It was all just coming together. And we all went together.
David, can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you applied for the California School of Fine Art and you got invited to go, I read somewhere that you were met by Minor White and quite an interesting conversation developed from that initial meeting about your lack of large camera, I think, probably.
Yeah. Once it was arranged for my travel, the date I was going to travel, and where I was going to get off the bus in Oakland and then take the ferry across, a gentleman who lived in that house, a number of people lived in that house who were going to help the California School of Fine Arts be a success, because they had applied for money to run a photography school. Having met those people and finally met Minor White, changed things tremendously. Oh, I'm going to be here with other photographers who are on the GI Bill, and I'm part of that group who knew a lot more about photography than I did. Where's your camera? Well, here's the camera I brought with you. Well, that's an interesting camera, but you're probably going to need another type of camera. One that you could put a film holder in it, and you can load your film up and go out and shoot pictures. That was hardly the case. So we know where you can get a camera. In fact, I have a couple of cameras. If you'd like to purchase one, yeah, I had some money. So I'm being equipped now. The school hasn't begun yet, okay? And it's the people from all over who wanted to be in that class with Ansel Adams. I didn't know anything about Ansel Adams. So it was my opportunity really to be with people, the same goal. We have the GI Bill. We can study with Ansel Adams. And most of all, the few people are here, we're all going to live in the same house. In the house, that part of the city where I made my photographs was another part of San Francisco. I had been there while I was in the Navy, because on weekends we could come from where the airport is down that area. The government had got that all and set up a station there. And these guys would fly out and drop bombs or something. Right. So I get my leave from that area, and I got a place to live, and I'm going to meet the people who are going to run the school. What a break! Because many people didn't have that opportunity.
Right, and for the folks who aren't from America, for Simon and Simon and Andrew and the folks in Europe, a lot of people don't know what the GI Bill is, and I was going to ask you about that, because. So first, could you explain what the GI Bill is for our friends overseas, and then secondly, I'm wondering how big of an impact did the GI Bill have for photography? Because there were a lot of men coming out of World War II who used that for education that ended up going into the arts, including photography. And I don't think people really realize how massive an impact that one thing had on photography in particular. So if you take that and run with it, that would be awesome.
Okay. In Jacksonville, I returned to my job that I had before I went into the service. I had a job, but I also had the GI Bill, and I also had this interest in photography. This may be my chance. And there was a drugstore in my city, and they run the newspaper. And this editor ran a newspaper article about photography, and Ansel Adams' name was mentioned. I wrote to the editor, and he says, communicate directly with Ansel Adams. Here's an opportunity. So I wrote to Ansel Adams. I am a Negro. I am interested in photography.
I guess the question really is for Simon and Andrew, what is the GI Bill? Because a lot of people don't even know, what's the GI Bill? They hear that and they don't understand what that means.
The GI Bill is an educational bill that was given to all the veterans in World War II. It's like a scholarship loan from the government if you were a veteran. And that's what the GI Bill is, virtually.
Right. It's actually, I think, still in effect to this day.
I think
That's really, yeah.
I was just going to say, I really appreciate that explanation there, and I think it's probably worthwhile mentioning there's another voice that just appeared there on the podcast. Erik, would you like to introduce our other person that's on the show?
Absolutely, ladies and gentlemen. I introduce David's incredibly awesome wife, Jackie.
Thank you very much for introducing me. I didn't want to interfere, but sometimes we get off track.
My fiance is constantly like putting a lasso on me and yanking me back on track. So, and if you'd ever heard our podcast, we get off track all the time.
Jackie, Erik was a guest on our show last year, and we did have to keep pulling him back on track. Can I ask, take you back to those early days when you were meeting the fellow teachers and students at the School of Fine Art? I mean, who were you mingling with? Just name drop a few names for us in terms of teachers and other students who we might have heard of.
Flikr Jones is one. Flikr Jones was had married a lady from Germany. And these were the people, that had heard about Ansel Adams, knew about him. I didn't know anything about. Never heard, because when I wasn't a scholar of advanced photography. I was just a kid running around with a camera, enjoying taking pictures. You mean there's something beyond that? Yeah. Eastman makes cameras and all these people. And where can I get a camera? The drugstore said, I get cameras in here periodically from the hot shop. Oh, is that valuable? Okay. Can I get one of these cameras from the hot? We will get one for you. My first camera.
Right. And then your first 4x5 though, so when you got to school, that camera wasn't up to snuff. And then you got your first 4x5, right, from the instructors themselves. Didn't they end up pooling their money to help you out to get a proper first kit, as Andrew or Simon would say?
That's right.
Right. In the house that he lived with Ansel Adams was Ruth Marion Baruch. Perhaps you've heard of her.
Yeah.
And the instructors were Dorothea Lange, some of them. Included Dorothea Lange. And different ones, Imogen Cunningham.
Right.
Lisa Manette. Edward Wesson.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's the entirety of the royalty of the San Francisco F-64 group.
Right. And David was the youngest. And he's now 94.
Anybody here in this podcast and amongst our audience would probably give a body part to take a single class from a single one of them. Yeah.
Yes, they are the greatest photographers of the 20th century. And David had the opportunity not only to study with them, to have photography with them. Actually, he went out with Edward Wesson and photographed in the Bay. And that's one of the greatest photographers, even before Ansel Adams. And you know that Ansel Adams always stands out. But these others like Dorothea Lange, Muriel Green, and those photographers are some of the greatest of the 20th century. And even Gordon Parks, who is another African-American photographer.
Oh, Gordon is a huge hero of mine. He was, I was going to get to him a little bit later on when we sort of meandered into the civil rights era. Okay. But we're setting the stage now. It's the mid to late 40s. You're there for classes. And I think a lot of people from my generation don't really realize, because we grew up with San Francisco as the hippie place, super counterculture, very liberal. But in the 40s, what was San Francisco like? Was it the same as where you'd come from? How segregated was it? How different was it? What did you as a black man coming to San Francisco, what was that experience like?
I'm coming to a city which everybody wants to come to. California, San Francisco, people from all over the world. The city that put the Japanese into camps, that sort of thing. And the city that Black people from various parts of the country came there to work in the war industry. And these people became my neighbors, and these people became my subjects. And very much, many of my photographs are based on that group of people who are now seeking to move out of the Fillmore district into the other part of San Francisco. And those were the people who became my subjects. Bands that were just coming into San Francisco. Because you don't go to downtown San Francisco. Where are you going to play, black bands? We're going to play in the Fillmore district. Ha-ha. How's that going to handle? How are you going to handle that, David? They would be my subjects. And many of the subjects that I exhibit right now are those people. The entertainers.
Right.
The Langston Hughes people like that. Little did I know, I knew a little bit about that, the makeup of that city, because I was in a base. I was in a base near San Francisco. And on weekends, I would get to leave and I would come into San Francisco. And there are all these black people and Japanese on the streets. They became friends of mine. So what really spiked my interest when I'm out of the service, I have the GI Bill, I know what I want to do. Wow, San Francisco? Couldn't get any better than that. Thank you, Jesus.
Right.
Thank you, Lord.
But at the same time, I was struck by your work goes through some very distinct stages, right? Mm-hmm. You have some really, while you're in school, there's some really interesting street photography, some of it large format, some square when you got a roll of flex. And in that early work, you seem to play a lot with a combination of highlight. Like there's an image on a corner. You said you took these two images almost back to back. Like you took an image, a street photography image on the corner, and it has all these little windows and vignettes. Like there's a mirror and there's a woman's leg, and then there's a hole, and there's another woman walking through, and there's a man selling, I think, newspapers. And there's like these little mini scenes in there. And to me, it's a really interesting combination of highly controlled framing and spontaneity. And so there's that street photography aspect that I found really fascinating. And then from there, you started to photograph more of the bands and the arts. Mm-hmm. And I was curious, of your instructors, you have Ansel Adams, Minor White, Imogen Cunningham, all these different instructors. Which of them sort of impart on you that tightly controlled framing of windows and foreground and background and different structures? And which of them impart on you that spontaneity of like, oh, there's that moment, get it, that carries forward through your work all the way through?
Right. Fillmore Street was a street.
Right.
I don't know that part of San Francisco, where the people are and where the hip people are, where the drinks are, and where the beginning of a successful Black community in San Francisco. Not people who were here. I came just because of the there were job opportunities.
Right.
And the counter is there was segregation. Black people couldn't live in a place like my wife and I live with now. Mm-hmm. So I had all of this coming together, which is going to affect my photographs, where I take the photographs, and who are some of the important people that I need to know. Alton Goodlett. Some of these were successful Black people. They ran newspapers. It was the place to be. And it's a retreat of the tremendous city part of San Francisco where Black people lived in success. Remember, these homes that they were living in were formerly lived in by the Japanese,
Right.
who were in the camps now. So I've got all of this at my command. So I have this mixed population. I have black people who are here from Texas and places like this. They all became my subjects. And I had people who ran. I'm getting a little help here.
Well, actually, just really quickly, what I'm really curious about right now, and then we'll move on to your subjects, was which of the instructors impacted you? You know, we have this list of the greatest photographers of the earliest 20th century, like right in front of you, giving you courses. Which ones impacted you the most? Like when you look back, was it Ansel? Was it Miner? Was it Dorothea? Like who impacted you the most as a photographer in those early years? Miner White? Okay. And how?
Well,
how did Miner impact you?
I lived in a house when I came to San Francisco where Miner White lived. My first camera, that little camera you got won't work, but you have another camera here which will take 4x5 photographs. He mentored me on what equipment I would be needing, okay? And he was an instructor. And I depended a great deal on Miner.
Okay.
Well, Miner, this is a little problem I got here. What do you think? Dave, I think you should do this.
So, David, as well as Miner White teaching you how to use your gear, what would a typical lesson, a photography lesson, be like? Sitting in front of Miner White, what did he give you assignments? Did he start talking about storytelling and building ideas and themes and emotions into pictures? Tell us a little bit about a photography lesson with Miner White, if you can remember.
Well, number one, the camera I brought with me was not going to work.
Yeah.
We shoot with 4x5 film there, David. You will need a 4x5 camera. Okay. Where do I fly a 4x5 camera? There was a camera shop in San Francisco, downtown near Market Street. Go there, and they will have 4x5 equipment. You're going to need film holders, all those basic needs I would need to succeed in my assignments. And the meter. What's a meter? You've got to take a reading of your subject so you would know what f-stop to use. It will solve that problem because when you go take your film to the darkroom, it's important that you had a proper exposure. You won't have the success when you make the print. These were all basic things. The advantage I had was I lived in the house and they were right at my hand. I lived there for quite a while before I moved on my own. And the Western Master 2 was the meter that we used quite a bit. In fact, I still use a Western Matters meter. These were the basics if you want to be a success and do the assignments that you're assigned to. How am I going to do this? You're going to need a certain film speed. How am I going to do this? Okay. You're going to make sure that when you evaluate your subject, if the subject is in motion, how do you stop that if you need to stop it? If it's more than one person in the assignment, you got to back up and use a wide angle lens. These were some of the basics that I needed to succeed as a photographer and fulfill my assignments. Because some of these people had been doing photography prior to that. I had not. So in order to succeed in my trade, which I did, thank goodness, because I had these wonderful people around who were my instructors. And I also had this scratch that. I had this.
Oh, go on, tell more.
That'll be in the next show we do. It played its role. I'll leave it at that, okay. So I had a lot to learn. You know, I'm this kid from Jacksonville. I'd not been exposed to city life as I was going to be.
So you mastered, with some help from the likes of Miner White, you mastered loading film speed, how to use your light meter, which lens to choose, and you know you need some degree of mastery of all that stuff before you can go and forget it all, because photography is all about the image and the light, isn't it? And so once you'd mastered all that, what kind of direction were you encouraged down by these tutors of yours? What sort of assignments might you have been sent on, and were you asked to explore certain themes or ideas? What were the lessons like?
Interesting question. Remember now, I was in the Navy, and on weekends when we got our leave, where did I go? To San Francisco. I already had a body of people. David, you're back in San Francisco. Yeah. I'm here now. Photography. Really? Yeah. Well, come over to my place. There's a band going on down on Fillmore Street. Come on down. We will. You can. I know some of the musicians there, so you can get some photographs in there. The local paper, the Sun Reporter, was interested. It was a black paper, in news that were going on in the black community. Carlton Goodlett, the doctor, owned that paper. Where am I going to get my photographs printed? Take them to Carlton Goodlett. Carlton Goodlett became immediately interested in David Johnson. He's studying photography. He's black, and he's doing pictures of our community. The Fillmore Street was a kind of major place. And in my book, and photographs you'll see of mine, many of them were taken on Fillmore Street. Fillmore was, and I once lived on Fillmore Street, much later. But Fillmore was, and my wife did a book on it. The Harlem of the West is the title of the book.
Right. And so basically what I'm hearing say is that for your assignments and for the work that you did for school, you gravitated towards things that you were comfortable with and familiar with, and also interested in, Fillmore, the Black American experience, music, jazz, and places where you had community to go to with familiarity.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense. I think any one of us here, if we're going to go photograph something, we typically go to something we're either interested in or comfortable with.
The books have been published, and in the book, Harlem of the West are photographs taken by David Johnson. I made my mark on San Francisco. It made its mark on me because without Fillmore Street, where am I going to go photograph? I'll find a place. I'll go up to the mountains. I'll go down to the waterfront. It was waiting for David Johnson to come and photograph it. And David Johnson arrived. And David Johnson photographed.
Well, in that second phase, since we're talking about the musicians and that sort of thing, something that really struck me was, a few things struck me, but one of them was that we have these monumental artists, Nat King Cole.
Right.
At that point in time, everybody knew Nat King Cole. And he could perform at, say, the Fairview, but he couldn't stay there. Nor could local musicians, Black American musicians, African American musicians, nor could they be in the house band there.
They would live at the Fairmont Hotel. The hotels in San Francisco were open to stars like that. They had a kind of an agreement with people in the black community. This section of the Fairmont Hotel was dedicated to black musicians. And my wife and I, not too long ago, went there. And every Black History Month, the NAACP, along with the local branch, put a show on there. In fact, there's a whole department in the Fairmont Hotel, very anxious to get the black community to live there, and also to be have the musicians with them.
Right. So, but for you as a photographer, as a member of that community, as an artist yourself, what was it like to walk into this opulent place and know that if you had wanted to stay there, if Nat King Cole had wanted to stay there, you couldn't? Was that for us, it seems very almost it's outrageous, but it's also outrageous at an academic level because none of us have experienced that, right? So what was that like to be a photographer, to take an image of an icon and know that neither of you were truly welcome in that place?
Initially, that was the case. At that part in time, when I was new in the city, a student, that sort of thing, I couldn't take my girlfriend, that's all. However, as San Francisco, as a really city that people would want to attend, needed to get in touch with the civil rights movement to be part of a city. Excuse me. Anyway, slight interruption. It became clear that San Francisco will be the city that everybody wants to come and live. There were many famous people who were not in the circus would choose San Francisco. And San Francisco Fairmont Hotel set up its own unit up there where Black people would welcome and people would come there and play their music. And if I want to get married and I want a place, the Fairmont Hotel has a whole section.
Right.
Has a whole section.
But which means you could rent a space for a little while to have an event, but you couldn't stay in a room.
Back in those days, yes.
What was that like? That experience of knowing you were only partially welcome there, as an artist and as a Black man, was that?
I was much too busy trying to succeed in what I was doing. I didn't have the money to live there.
Yeah.
There were places available within the Fillmore community, readily available to me, that I wouldn't run into this kind of problem. So it was not an issue that I want to do photographs.
Right.
The NAACP is an organization who will deal with that sort of thing. I could call a local office and say, what hotels in San Francisco Black people are readily available? They would tell me. So the civil rights movement is moving along now, dealing with places within the whole United States where these sort of things occur.
David, I'd like to just talk a little bit about your motivations for the type of photography that you were doing, especially that you went to be taught by, we've talked about, some of the absolute giants of 20th century photography. And I mean, this is an era I'm not particularly well versed in, but certainly I know about Ansel and his landscape work, and I'm sure that will be one of the main things. I mean, you've already talked about going into the mountains and looking at streams and the waterfronts and stuff like that. But clearly, you were drawn to street photography, and you're at a fine art college. And I'm just wondering, what was the view of your tutors about the style of photography that you were drawn to? Were they encouraging of that, or were they saying, do it if you like, but really this is what you should be doing? I mean, what was their general view of what you wanted to do?
I had an interest in music. I'm not a musician. I learned to play the harmonica early on. If I had a harmonica here, I'd play for you. Okay. They were not educated people. They got jobs in Jacksonville. The lady who raised me picked cotton one place in her life. I'm coming to San Francisco to study photography. Luckily for me, I'm going to photograph those subjects that interest me, one, and secondly, it was accessible to me. Certain places I probably wouldn't go in and try and photograph. So what you're raising was readily available to me. The Fillmore Street, Black people lived on that street, okay? They had businesses on that street, and they were the subject that I was going to be on my portfolio on, which I did. And people from out of town, famous people who didn't live in a downtown San Francisco, would live in along Fillmore District.
But
Erik, I'm not so sure that David understood your question.
Right.
I'm going to fill in for you.
Okay.
David filmed the Black community simply because he didn't have transportation to the mountains. That's a simple explanation. So, I mean, you can't follow Ansel Adams to Yosemite if you don't have transportation.
Couldn't you have hitched a lift? Couldn't you have hitched a lift with Ansel? I said, come on, Ansel, you've got a big station wagon. Okay, you must have room for me.
There's a lot of people that want to get in that big station wagon. However, David is a city boy, and he doesn't necessarily want to get in that station wagon and go to the mountain. So he films where he's at.
Yeah.
And it's called the Henry Bisson of the moment, filming of the moment. And that's where he was, in the Fillmore in San Francisco. And that's what his pictures, and that's what Miner taught him. Go where you know.
Okay, so Miner was encouraging of this outlet at the Fillmore and in San Francisco and other areas.
Sure. Since you interrupt, talk about our most recent experience in Ansel Adams country.
Oh,
yeah.
He says talk about his most recent experience in Adams.
Sure.
So
we were there recently. Yosemite.
We were in Yosemite, and he tried to film Yosemite. I think he's better in the Fillmore.
They didn't come out, or
they came out.
I had the technique. I knew how to produce an image and a photo and a photograph.
But the techniques and catching the subjects in the right position and being able to develop them, that is a difference. You know, right. The technique there is in the developing, and David was a fantastic developer in the dark room. His whites and blacks are extremely, if you can look at them, are extremely great for that period of time or any period of time. I mean, you know, the whites that turn from the grays and the grays that turn from the blacks. Mm-hmm. That's really what makes his photography so great, is how great he was in the dark room. And he has not spoken about that. And sometimes I have to interject, gentlemen.
Well, I'm the out of the three guys here, Jackie, I'm the darkroom worker. Well, sure. Simon is a little bit, to be fair to him. He's just beginning. But I've been printing in the darkroom for just a mere 35 years. Okay. So, you know, it's a passion for me. So I'm really interested that you brought that up. I know we've completely gone off the timeline, but we can come back to that. So you, in your early days, David, you were sending film off to drugstores. But when did you first get into the darkroom and start printing, developing film and making your first prints? And do you still do it?
Still do it. It started right away. It was part of our training. There was a darkroom available at the California School of Fine Arts. Yeah. They had a whole series of darkrooms there where you can go and load your film. And once you had exposed your film, you could go there and process them. Plus, people had their own little darkrooms. You know, you can go down and get the chemicals and make your own darkroom. Mm-hmm. But during the training, the dark rooms were available. The chemicals.
Tell me you had a printing lesson from Ansel Adams.
A printing lesson from Ansel Adams.
Did you?
No. Yes, he did.
I'm getting a little help now.
You know, David is 94, so he doesn't.
Well done, Jackie. You keep it under control.
He did from Ansel Adams, and what did Ansel tell you? He was not an absolute purist. David asked Ansel Adams, I thought you were a purist. That is, you do not touch up your pictures in the darkroom. Ansel said to David, I'm not an absolute purist.
Not at all. Like if you look at his negative versus the end print, they're remarkably different. Like the moon rise, this famous moonrise shot in New Mexico.
Yeah.
The contact sheet is so different from that print.
Yeah.
his use of bleach and everything on the whites, that was something else. He was a heavy manipulator.
You've got to keep a bottle of potassium ferricyanide in the darkroom for picking up those little highlights and making the print sing. It's people say you shouldn't. I never Photoshop an image, but this is what darkroom workers, like David Ansel Adams, they've been doing this for years. A little bit of bleach here, and bring that highlight up there.
And we learned to mix our own chemicals.
Yeah,
that's what the California School of Fine Art had its teachers there, people on staff who would teach us that if you were new to it. But pretty soon, you could do it yourself. You know what chemicals to use. You know where they were available. You know where the stores were in San Francisco. You would purchase the chemicals.
Well, I was curious. So a lot of your images and a lot of things you talk about in terms of the content of the images, they have these little unscripted moments. The jazz trumpet player with the man in the foreground shadow with the hat. The portrait of Eartha Kitt where the front newsboy had his hands over his eyes. Lincoln and the young boy during the civil rights protests in San Francisco. All these little magic like things that you could never plan for, right? And I'm a proponent of making your own luck. Like you always have to be prepared, and then when those things happen in front of you, you don't hesitate. You get them. You talk about having days that are magic, that are in the zone where everything is just there. It's a magic day. For photographers, large format, medium format, who don't really know what's that like, do you have any advice for the rest of us on not only recognizing those magic moments, but getting them and not second guessing them? Like, what would you tell us? What advice would you give us to capture those types of images?
I think it begins in your early childhood. Who were the people who raised you? And what was the exposure you had with those people? My mom always took me down to this drugstore where I could buy candy bars. You remember that. Or in that church, certain things took place. And this kind of reminds me of a photograph I could take of that. You didn't do it there. It was not, it's not, but it's implanted in your head. And that's what you sort of depend on. I've been trying to learn how to play the piano. There's a pianist in town. I would want to hear that person. My oldest daughter now just asked me to help her with a guitar. I've been kind of playing around with the guitar for quite a while. So it's those things in your background. As you're raised, you're being modeled or raised for the world that you're going to live in or compete in. And I think that drives the artists to do what they do. And it almost supplants the subject. Why you have pictures of all these cats around and all? The person has cats.
Right.
Other items, which may be. If you're going to be an artist, it begins sort of in your early ways. What would be my subject? Some things you didn't like. That's what may not be my subject. I kind of think it's like.
David, when you were photographing these friends of yours and acquaintances and people that you were, that you'd grown up with or you'd come to know and love, Erik talked about some of these images that you made and these unscripted moments. Mm-hmm. Are you having a conversation with these people? How long would a session with, a portrait session take? And are you just waiting for them to adopt that position, that hand to go to their head, or, that look, and you're just ready there, bang, and or are your sessions a lot quicker than that? How would a typical session with these, with your portrait subjects, how would it unfold?
I'll answer you this way. If I knew you and was around you for a period of time, I would notice that you kind constantly did this or you did that.
Yeah. Okay. Observation.
Would that lend itself to a photo? Or we could be going on and, we're out shooting pictures now. I noticed that you do down. About me taking a photograph of it that way. Or we went to dances and all. And, we're going to this dances and so is going to be playing. And I want to see you cut that rug. You observe. And that observation can turn into a photograph or not. We're out with a group photographing and certain things come up. Oh, you really don't walk that. I hear you talk bad about that all the time. Are you sure you want to do that? It's imprinted in your mind, what you do as you're growing up. Things like, I'm passing San Quentin printing. My dad spent X number of years there. The last place I want to photograph.
Right.
As you develop as a human and as a civilized person, your do's and don'ts are also in mind. It will be true if you were an artist or not an artist. That's kind of I think that sort of determines what you do when you grow up and you're making your own decision. Are we going to such and such? Oh no.
The book, A Moment of Seeing.
Well, actually, that brings me. There's a question I had for you, and this is a big question. So I guess it's for you and Jackie both. It seems to me, having looked over your career, that there was a period of time where you didn't have a studio. You were working the post office. You were working with NAACP, and you were involved in civil rights, not necessarily fully as a photographer, but also as an activist. But you spent a lot of time taking photographs through the years, not for pay, right, but more to bear witness, because this is your community. These are important times. These are important events, and that is a mission, a task that I've noticed more with minority artists who feel that for the sake of their community, they have to be a witness to history, right? I just watched a speech by Reverend Martin Luther King, in which he said, when talking about the nonviolent movement and whatnot, that whites had a monopoly on violence. And it struck me that I'm one of those, also have a monopoly on the luxury of not having to bear witness like a black artist like you had to. And I'm curious, like, what do you think about that burden? That you had to take photos to bear witness to history versus taking photos to earn a living and to pay your, like, you had to do something else to pay your bills other than the thing you loved.
I would answer that this way. Let's say housing. Jack and I are out looking for houses, maybe. Certain neighborhoods, I don't know. You think we'd be accepted there? Even in the modern day today, wouldn't it be against the law not to be accepted there? I think it affects, as it affected me, I would answer this. There's certain places I wouldn't go looking for housing. Right. Just something about that neighborhood that I don't think I'd be comfortable in. Or if I'm just the other way around, and I love living in that neighborhood where I'm not necessarily welcome, I won't go anyway. I'll show them. To be that, it just depends upon how you manage that part of your likes and dislikes. Or this part of San Francisco, there were certain parts I wouldn't go in there even today. It isn't that I would not be accepted there, but I wouldn't just be comfortable there. That wouldn't be my kind of place.
Right.
I think it works no matter what field you're in. It would dictate where you have your camera and what subjects that you would choose. If you had the assignments,
Mm-hmm.
That's a different matter.
Right.
You find some excuse not to get it. I'll say, I got a buddy that's certain that he would be great for you. I'm going to be busy that day. You might find an excuse. I sort of think that it's functioning whether you are conscious of it or not. It's
Right.
kind of built in.
So basically, for you, photographing these huge moments in history was just natural. It's just something that you felt was the thing to do, versus like taking work for an assignment you weren't interested in for money. Just wasn't something that you'd find an excuse not to do it. That's right. Is that a fair way to put it? Okay.
Or you do it and you don't do it very well. You
Right.
screw it up. And then you can come have some weak excuse. Yeah, well, I had the wrong film or something. Well, can you come back and photograph? Yeah, I'll be back. Certainly didn't enjoy it. It wasn't your assignment. Some things that fit right into your assignment. Photographs say, my photographs speak that, because they're rather sort of akin to each other. You look through the book, A Dream Begun So Long Ago. That's the book that Jackie.
Right. And then,
Go ahead.
Simon, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Your
I
mic
do.
was unmuted. Okay, Andrew, yeah,
I'm
please.
curious about something. It's a bit of a segue, a bit of a tangential question. But Jackie, when did you guys meet? How long have you been married? And are you a photographer? And what role have you played in David's life over these years and to this day? So lots of little questions there, but you.
I was away. You have to ask me again.
Oh, I'm not sure I remember now. So I said,
You reappeared.
Jackie,
Okay.
I had a question for you. Really, I was going to ask when you guys met, under what circumstances, if you don't mind answering that. And are you a photographer? What kind of role have you played in David's career and life? The ups and downs, and how long have you been married? Tell us a little bit about Jackie and how you fit into David Johnson's world.
Okay, thank you very much for asking. David and I met over 60 years ago. And during the course of those 60 years, we've been married to different people. However, his wife was my best friend. And so when my husband died and David's wife died over 16 years ago, we met again about 11 years ago and got married. So it's
Wow.
kind of romantic side. And actually, since I've known David all that time, the first, 30 years, I really didn't realize that David was a photographer. I mean, nothing to me.
Really?
Yes. And so all of his most outstanding pictures that are in the Library of Congress and in the UC Berkeley Library, Bancroft, those pictures he took without me really being on the scene. When I did come on the scene, when I married him in these last 11 years, I happened to have a degree in marketing, which just fit his career. And I'm also an author. So I wrote the book about him. And that was pretty easy. So now all of this came up, and I got involved with his colleagues that were still living, called the Golden Decade of Photography at the now San Francisco Art Institute. And we just took off. And David has a library named after him in the Harvey Milk Center in San Francisco, which is filled with everything that photographers need to do, all the books you ever wanted to know about photography. And we just have exhibits all over the world, in the United States, in Rochester, where the Kodak film is made,
Yep.
in Atlanta, of course, Jacksonville, in South Carolina, it's all over California, and many different places. So to sum it up, I've learned a lot about photography, more than I ever wanted to know. Thank you.
More than you ever realized
wives,
existed.
as most of your wives would say.
Yes.
It's a very interesting. David still takes photography, only he does it with a cell phone, which is easy. It's not so much the dark room nowadays. The dark room that he had that I came to know at the Harvey Milk Center, as Erik is familiar with,
Oh, yeah.
they still have all the major chemicals and everything that you actually develop pictures with. Andrew, you would love that dark room if it was open now during COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the largest dark rooms facilities in California.
Yeah.
I was in San Francisco in 2016 as part of a 50th year road trip, and I didn't know Erik then, and boy, I thought, why didn't I know you? Because my 4 or 5 days in San Francisco would have been so much different. I mean, I met some lovely people, but if I'd have known Erik, and I could have met you guys and gone to the darkroom and the library, wow, it would have been fantastic.
It would have been shenanigans.
It really would have been. It really would have been. You would have met some of the younger best photographers in the area.
Which is not me, to be clear.
But. Of course you are, Erik. But we have for California, San Francisco especially is a hub for photographers. There are a lot of them around.
Jackie, I was met by a friend of ours who's mainly a Polaroid photographer, and she got together a load of about 12 mainly Polaroid photographers, and we met in the Borderlands Cafe bookstore. Is it?
Yes.
You know
Mm-hmm.
It's I mean, we made the mistake of staying in Fisherman's Wharf, like where all the tourists stay. But if you just walk directly away from there, you end up in magical places like Castro and Brian Brooks, another friend. We met him, and he took us around where all the murals were, and we were chatting with the guys who were actually painting. So the street artists were painting. We met them and photographed them. So I did meet some more authentic-y. Well, I don't know how authentic they were, but they were San Francisco people. We didn't just do the tourist things, but boy, it would have been fantastic to have met you.
Brian Brooks.
It would have been fantastic for you to go to the San Francisco Art Institute, which is where Ansel Adams were. If you were in Fisherman's Wharf, you were within walking distance of that facility, of that school.
Yeah, the end of Columbus Street.
Well, I need to go back. So we just need to get COVID under control, and we'll be on the aeroplane.
You need to come, Simon, down there in black and white.
Yeah.
I was going to say we don't publish the video here, so that's going to confuse a lot of people who are listening to this at the moment. But it's
which is unfortunate because right now you're beautiful, man. You're cinematic.
Well, there you go.
Cinematic.
So what's next then on this magical roller coaster, Jackie? You've got your degree in marketing. You've tapped into something. I mean, and made David's work more accessible and known to folks. I mean, what next? iPhone pictures?
We're still showing some of David's pictures for Black History Month, which is the month of February coming up. Mm-hmm. We will be exhibiting David's unknown pictures. He went to Cuba in 2003.
Okay.
And he took photographs of the Cuban people. So we will be exhibiting some of those for Black History Month this year, and those type of things, and for different other societies in Miami, for instance, some pictures of his that have not been widely known or seen.
I was going to ask about the Cuba photos. I saw mention of the trip, but I looked and looked and looked for the photos. I was like, where are the Cuba photos? Where are the Cuba photos? I was going to ask what happened to the Cuba photos.
They're mostly unhidden because people like those black and whites. And the black and whites are, to all of you photographers who want to get known, get a good marketing person.
So wait, the Cuba images are in color?
The Cuban images are in color.
Ooh. Okay.
Jackie,
Yes.
3 years ago, I found myself in Atlanta. Our daughter was in university there for a semester, and we did a rubbish thing and a brilliant thing all in one day. The rubbish thing was going to the Museum of Coca-Cola. Okay,
I love that.
but we
Yep.
came straight out of there, and immediately opposite, you've got the Museum of Civil Rights, and we walked in there, and I mean, I knew a lot of that stuff, and of course, it's in our consciousness. And I was looking at some images, and there was a lady there with her it turned out a granddaughter, black lady with her granddaughter, and I was looking at this picture, and she was looking at it, and she was probably about 60, 65, and I said, is this? How is this now for you? I didn't know this lady from Adam. I said, how is this now for you? Are we through this? I sensed that we probably weren't, and I think recent events now, this is 2017, recent events have demonstrated that we clearly aren't through it. But she says, no. She said, you see those young boys in that photograph who were taking part in those, in those racist or Ku Klux Klan marches, they're now my age. And it's still in them, it's just been pushed down, and it's maybe they can't quite express it, but it's going to take many, 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 many more generations for that, to finally disappear if it ever does. And this area of civil rights, I mean, we've sort of jumped from probably just before that to now. And can we wind both of you back to that time when you got into the civil rights? How did you get drawn into the civil rights movement? How did you start taking pictures of key people in those demonstrations and in that movement?
The very first march on Washington, I was present. Okay.
What year was that, David?
1963.
Okay, so this is Martin Luther King big speech time, is it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, all that occurred prior to my going into photography as a trade. And each time they have a big event in around Martin Luther King or the Civil Rights Movement, I get phone calls from them, and they already have on file photographs that I took during that period of time. So we stay in touch. Something's going on, and they want a photograph that they don't have in it. They'll communicate with us. And Jackie and I had the privileges of going back. When was it, Jackie?
We went back for the 50th anniversary of the 1963 March. But back to your original question, I think that the other part of David's career that is not known, that he was activist in the civil rights movement back in the 60s and the 70s. And he actually started an organization at the University of California, which actually provided or opened the path for many of the doctors and nurses there. It's called the Black Caucus, that where the people there did not have jobs beyond maintenance or aides or elevator operators. David actually started the first organization there called the Black Caucus that allowed the openings for many minorities and people of other colors, not only racial, but sexual persuasions, to be able to get jobs in San Francisco and throughout the University of California system.
Well, David, you were also the president of, let me make sure I have the name right, the Postal Alliance, which was an organization that advocated for equal rights and equal pay in the U.S. Postal Service. Like prior to that.
That's true. And I worked 30 years in the Postal Service and became a postal executive in the United States Postal Service, and much of that was because of the work that David did as president of the union for that. So he has two sides. Everybody likes to talk about his photography, but that's one of the reasons why the library in San Francisco was named after him, because he had these other areas that he worked in beside photography as an activist, a civil rights activist.
Well, it's like you said earlier, your photography is driven by the other parts of your life, by your upbringing, by your history, by the things you're interested in, by your community, right? So it kind of goes to follow that, as a young man who'd grown up in the segregated South, who was the first in his family to like learn how to read and write and be interested in the arts, and who served in World War II, that you would gravitate towards something like the civil rights and taking those photographs. Yeah. What is your favorite photograph from the civil rights movement? What is your single favorite image that you made? There are a lot of beautiful ones, but I'm curious what your favorite one is. And Jackie, now that you've gone through his work so much, what is your favorite image of his from the civil rights movement?
Well, I have more than one. One is
I'm making it tough.
Boy in Lincoln, of course.
Yep.
Which, if you've all seen The Boy in Lincoln, and we're also going to exhibit that this coming month. And We Demand. Olivia, We Demand.
Yep.
So, David, which are your favorite?
I have too many just select one. The others wouldn't like my selection. It's the kind of, when I go back and look at the photographs, I become one of my own admirers. Who took this picture? David Johnson took. Yeah, you.
Who was that man?
I just have a number of favorites, and when I collectively, I'm sort of glad that it was my time in the world, and whether you're religious or not, that we all have a time when we can make an important contribution. You may not have done it alone, but you were part of it. And the fact that I was at the first March on Washington, they've called us back a couple of times to talk about what was it like in that time. And since that time, think of the students who've come through those schools. Mm-hmm. And this is what it was like back in the day.
Erik and Andrew and Simon, I don't know how familiar you are with John Lewis, who died recently this past year. We just ran across the photograph that David took of John Lewis and Jackie Robinson, the baseball player, together in a civil rights march, which is a very iconic photograph.
Yeah. And
we never realized that John Lewis, he's a young man marching with Jackie Robinson. And he's hidden, and it's a group of people, and they're marching. And David happened to be there and take that picture. Mm-hmm. So those are unique finds, and I think the BBC found that photograph.
They're going through the archives and like, hey.
They're going through the archives, and all of a sudden they asked about that photograph and in regard to Andy Warhol. And I'm saying, what?
Who?
They'll say, we need this kind of, I saw that photograph in such and such a book. They might say that.
Well, Jackie, I have to agree with you. And I think personally, like my single favorite, it's difficult to pick a single favorite image, but the image of Lincoln and the boy, like if I could put one of your images on my wall and I had to choose one, that would be the print I would choose. I would have a really hard time choosing anything else.
Erik, you should show it to Andrew and Simon and see if they can find the extra person in that photograph.
Oh, yeah, it's in there. Person. Yeah, I sent them a link to it earlier today. I was like, this photo! So, gentlemen, there is an extra person in there. You just have to find them.
David, You went back to school and did a master's degree at the age of 65, if my research is correct. What tell us about that?
Well, when I married this lady here, I was previously married to someone else, but she's had a special impact on my life. And we came together at a time when you've got all of these things that you've accomplished. Let's put them together. Otherwise, I may not be talking to you all about it. She's been a tremendous positive impact to me. And we're together on most things we do.
He got that degree because he needed a job.
What was the degree in? Was it in social work?
It's in social work.
Practical women.
Jackie, my daughter is in her second year of doing a master's in social work in Liverpool, in England. So I was very struck by the fact that David did it at 65.
It's hard to make it as a photographer or anything else. I mean, you'd sell your pictures, and practicality kicks in. Mm-hmm. And you go back to school, and even at that age, you're supposed to be retired, but you have to pay the bills. So you get a degree.
Yeah.
And you go to school. And he even worked in a prison as a social worker.
Well, I was going to say, where did that degree take David? So he went to a prison and worked as a social worker, you say?
Yes, he went to women's prison. David, no, as he previously mentioned to you, sex. No, he went to a women's prison in California.
Yeah, certain places you go, you can't exercise. Things may be in your head.
But he worked there for a long time down in the valley. I don't. What's the name of it? Chowchilla Valley, in California, in the women's prison for about 3 years. He worked there, and then he worked with foster children in California as a social worker. And he also worked with senior citizens right after he got that degree in Miami, Florida. Mm-hmm. So the social degree, the degree in social work took him many places.
And I tend to organize the group. There's somebody in there who, if we could do this or do that, that's what I thought about coming together as a group. And I'm skilled at that, putting people together. And it's not just you complaining, but you represent a number of people who feel the same way and who will present themselves and honor.
David, tell us a little bit about storytelling in photography and how one tells a story in photography, or maybe how you told stories. Give us some hints and tips.
Well, once you're born and you're growing up, you tend to gravitate towards certain things. It can be, I'll take this kind of candy there because so-and-so loves this kind of candy. I think in our lives, too, certain things appeal to us. And some you'll have people have said, I wish I could do that. Or I wish if I were a member of that, I would organize people to do that. I think we all have a little bit of that in our system. It's implementing it, which takes a little energy. I have people say, no, things are okay here. I don't want to disturb the things. Don't let that stop you. When these early inventors decide they want to explore the world, I suggested somebody, oh God, I would never go out in that ocean, all this. It's in people, and your ability to ignore that and move on if you feel strongly about it. It may not happen. And it may happen in your life, you may die or something. Somebody picks up the idea and say, yeah, so-and-so was working on that. And I thought it was a good idea, but I never put the energy or the time into it. I think we all have that opportunity. Sometimes it takes on. When the early explorers come in, how did they discover America? Somebody said, all those boats and all that water. I may not never make it. I think when I have it, it's implementing it, having the opportunity. Because some of the idea you have could mean you're in. So you have to have the ability to make your choice. And sometimes you don't recognize it until someone points it out. So and so and so and so. What you ought to do is put that in the book. You think so? No.
So sometimes you can amass a body of work over a lifetime, and looking back on it, you can see themes and stories, I guess, just emerge. As you look back on a body of work and remember a period of time. Is that often the case with you as well?
Yeah, even here. There's only one black family here. One. They treat us well here. There's no problem with the system, with the people here. I'd feel better if we worked more and getting more black people here. Not as employees.
Right.
No.
And it will happen sooner or later.
The one thing that in your podcast, gentlemen, that I will remind you of, there is a difference in generational description of things for you than for David. And sometimes he will not describe things in the same language that you do. And I hope that to the people listening to your podcast will understand that some things that he's saying are generational.
Yeah,
and are not explained in the same way as different generations explain them. So 90 years is a long time, and trying to explain something in one way and the same way to the people listening to it. So you will have to translate it for yourselves.
No, I think we really appreciate that. And there's there have been a few things that have really started to me. There've been quite a few little quotes there, but there was something that, and I want to, because I think we'll start to wind things down. But I'd just like to get David's view on advice for photographers. I mean, for instance, I've taken something here earlier on, was mentioned, like, how do you decide on taking a photograph of somebody? And it's to observe, it's to see, just watch the person before you actually get to the point of actually taking the photograph, to see what they do, the interesting things, the mannerisms that they have, and see if there's a photograph there. And I'm there thinking, that's just so simple, and it's just really it's a great thing. It's a great piece of advice, because that's something that I would really struggle with, and that's something I can take away, and I can actually do something with that. And I'm just wondering if there's any other bits of advice, especially, I mean, this show is aimed towards large format photography, but I'm just wondering if David has any other tips or wisdom for people that are interested in this hobby, and something that perhaps they could do to improve the way that they do things, or give them a little bit of inspiration.
Good question. If something is subject or a song or whatever keeps coming back to you, or you go to a movie and there's a solo in one of the scenes, and something going to, I've had that idea to put that sort of thing to music. I'm not. Then you start getting these excuses. Oh, well, I'm not a musician. Should I ask so and so? So it constantly think of the things that we may have if we had followed up on something that attracted you, appealed to you, and then you go somewhere and see it and say, I think about that all the time myself. It keeps revisiting you. And some people will act on it. Why don't you do it, honey? I'm not sure what you want me to do. Jack, you want to interrupt?
I'm trying to get him to talk about the man on the skateboard in answer to your question.
You do it, honey. Go ahead.
the man on the skateboard. Have you seen that picture?
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
it's an amazing photograph. I'm glad you brought it up, because I struggle to understand what's going on with that photograph.
Yeah, that's the man on the skateboard. I think that totally answers your question as to, what you were speaking to. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. We lost your vision. So we lost your vision.
Yeah.
So I think that particular picture especially answers your question. I mean, how do you take a person who has no legs in a time when disabilities were not considered?
Yeah.
That's one of the first pictures you will ever see of a person with a severe disability.
Yeah.
Back in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And that photograph in itself, it's an incredible photograph. I remember the first time I saw it, I didn't actually notice the disability at all. I just saw a man who was and it was a man of confidence looking at the camera, and and it was in many respects that it's unremarkable, because it's just a man a confident man looking at the camera, and then you see the rest of the photograph, and all of a sudden it doesn't make sense anymore. You can't think, well, what's happening here, and it's incredible, because you're not taking pity on him in any shape or form, and it's not voyeuristic or anything like that. You're showing that person for who he is. He has a severe disability, yet. You can see the strength in him, and he gets on with life, and it's an incredible photograph.
Like the subject himself almost dares you to feel sorry for him. Like, don't you, go ahead, feel sorry for me, try it. You know what I mean? Like, he's so straight at you that it's like, don't you dare feel sorry for me.
Mm-hmm. Here's a time where he's dressed for whatever's going on. His hat, his beard is trimmed, gloves on his hand.
He's sharper than me.
Yeah.
99.9% of the time.
Where are his trousers? He could be dressed for the evening.
Yeah. Well, David, I think on that incredible photograph, and anybody that hasn't seen that photograph, we'll try and find a way, with David's permission, to be able to share it within our Facebook group, because it's a photograph that I think everybody has to see if they haven't seen it. One of many fantastic, incredible photographs that you've taken over your career, and I think that's a good time to start to wind things down. In particular, to say thank you so much for making yourself available to us. It's been a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
So, Jackie, thank you very, very much for helping out as well. Really appreciate your input there. And perhaps this actually might be more of a question to you, Jackie, about ways for our listeners to how they can potentially see David's work out in the internet or in real life as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having David and myself. And we enjoyed talking to you today. And David's work is always at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and at the Bancroft Library in Berkeley, California. Those two libraries now own a substantial part of David's work, and they're available for researchers, and also at David's own library at the Harvey Milk Center. So thank you very much, gentlemen, and it has been a wonderful, wonderful time to meet each one of you, and we hope to see your work somewhere.
I do too.
For having us.
Is there a book? Is there a book published?
Yes, there is the book, The Dream Begun So Long Ago, but right now they're all sold. And unfortunately, the last one we sold for a tremendous price. But there are several books that David's work is in. Harlem of the West is one. The Golden Decade is one. They're still out. or for you to look
Okay.
for. The golden decade, as all the golden decade of photographers of Ansel Adams' first 10 years of photography and photographers. So if you're interested in that one, if you can get a hold of a copy of that, and the Harlem of the West. And there's also videos put out by KQED. Also, I think the BBC is going to put out a video in the near future. So,
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's been a pleasure, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Really a pleasure.
thank you, Erik, Andrew, and Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll just quickly say goodbye to our listeners. So, Andrew, how can people follow you on with all the things that you do?
Well, the wonders of social media. So if you can see stuff that I post up on Instagram and on Twitter at Warboys Snapper, and then we have this wonderful Facebook group called the Large Format Photography Facebook group, and I'm there all the time, really, just keeping people in order.
Okay.
Rabble rouser.
And we have if people want to get in touch with us and have a email read out, which will actually happen potentially next time we're actually on, how would they do that?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I think they should send an email to
Send it to
large format photography podcast at gmail.com.
Excellent. Well
Maybe.
done. And we've also got a Flikr group as well, haven't we? Which we haven't mentioned in the last couple of
We do.
shows. I think
That's curated and run by Colin Devroe.
That's it.
I've said that right, haven't I?
Yes, as close as we can, anyway.
So yes, Flikr's a great place to look at images.
It is. And Erik, how can people keep up with things that you do?
Pretty much just Instagram. ErikHmathy is my Instagram account. And you'll see currently photos of a large format lens being made out of wood in progress, and pet bunnies. Still more pet bunnies. We have pet bunnies, Jackie and David.
There will be some glass in that lens as well, won't there?
There will be some glass.
Yeah.
Soon, actually. After this weekend, the glass will be installed.
That's good. And I'm on Twitter as Simon4. I'm on Instagram as Simon Forster Photographic, which is also almost the name of my website, where you can buy lens caps. And I keep on saying it. And I'm getting so close to making lens boards. I have designs, and they're almost there. They're almost on sale. And that is simonforsterphotographic.co.uk. Our music is by Kevin McLeod of Incompetech.com. It's called Two Finger Johnny, and absolutely everybody loves it. And I just want to say thank you again to Jackie and David. It's been an absolute honour to have the both of you on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I can't say enough. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that is it. So I hope you've enjoyed it. We certainly have. And so goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.
I'm well into my 90s, so I'm enjoying it as long as it lasts.
Long may that continue to be, my friend.
Long may that. Thank you very much.
I want to get into my 90s with a good woman to lead me down the path of life.
Okay.
It sounds like you've got that.
You just made that sound like you haven't found that woman yet.
Yeah,
Andrew.
I think you do. She was just making you tea earlier. What are you talking
We've been
about?
married 30 years this year, and I hope in another 40 years, when I'm David's age, I hope she's there to guide me and support me and stop me saying stupid things.
Dude,
they're more observant than you really realize.
yeah, I mean,
oh yeah.